Okay, so in this chapter we're going to go over Maya's modeling tools. So to get started, let's create a cube and zoom in, let's shade it and make it a little bit bigger. Let's say 4 units, and holding down the X key, let's move it up off the origin 2 units just to kind of get it out of the way. Now the first tool I want to go over is under the Edit Mesh tab is the Extrude tool, and this allows us to do extrusions. And so you can see here, if we select some faces, you can also find the Extrude tool under the Polygon tab, and we can move this extrusion along kind of a local transformation. And let's undo that and extrude one more time. This time, clicking on this handlebar here, it changes it from normal to world space. Change it back, you can see the difference. We can also use these scale modifiers to scale in local space or world space. And so depending on what kind of extruding you need to do, one of these two modes should be able to get the job done. And let's undo this. Now, extruding is not just for faces, and I'll illustrate that by hiding the grid here and deleting this face on the bottom. We can also do extrusions on edges. So let's select these 4 edges, go up to the Edit Mesh tab, click the Extrude button, change this to world space, and voila! You see we can now move along edges as well, which I find I use almost as much as extruding on faces. It's really good for adding subdivisions to an object, or for just growing an object that's maybe more planar in nature. And that is extrusion. And so moving forward, let's duplicate this object by hitting Ctrl D to duplicate it. And we're going to go and delete these 2 faces at the top to illustrate our next tool, which is the Bridge tool. But first I'm going to go to the Mesh Combine tool to make this one piece. And now after I've done that, I'm going to select the edges around the holes that I want to connect or bridge in between. And then go back up to my Edit Mesh tab. And using the Bridge tool, you can see that that has now connected our holes, which is kind of like an extrusion, but an extrusion that will put 2 pieces together. Or if you have 2 holes, kind of join those holes up together. And if you look in the channel box right now, you can see what I'm doing is I'm adjusting the divisions just to get a more even tessellation in my object. But it's pretty cool that I can do this after the fact to kind of clean up my object. And that's the Bridge tool. And now let's move on to one of the tools that I use very frequently under Edit Mesh, which is the Cut Faces tool. And the way that this tool works is you just drag across a screen and you can put cuts and slices into your geometry. There's a couple options for using this tool. Right now I'm in what's called interactive mode. So let's switch to a side view of our object here. And in this interactive mode, if I hold down Shift, I can now constrain the cut to 45-degree angles, which is really useful for just kind of adding more subdivisions to your geometry or doing kind of more complicated, precise cuts. And now I'm going to show you some of the other ways to use the Cut Faces tool. So go to the options of the Cut Faces tool, and you can see that we were in interactive mode, and now we can constrain it to 2 planes. For example, right now we are on the Y and Z plane, and all of our snapping tools work with this plane. So if we hold down X, you can see, like we talked about in the previous chapter, I can now snap this to the grid, which is really great for adding additional subdivisions to a model. Another cool thing we can do with the Cut Faces tool is add multiple planes to an object. So for example, we're going to apply a plane that's constrained to X and Y, and now I'm going to create another plane, and this one I will constrain to Z and X. And the neat thing is they are both active. I can kind of move them around and fine-tune them to add more tessellation to my geometry. And like I said earlier, the Cut Faces tool is one of those kind of go-to tools that I find I use all the time. Okay, the next tool I want to go over is one that's kind of similar to the Cut Faces tool. It's the Split Polygon tool. And this tool works kind of like a knife. As you can see, we can just draw out cuts on our geometry. And you can end on the same edge that you started on as long as you've crossed multiple faces. So I'm going to undo this so that I can show you that it doesn't work just from edge to edge. We can also make cuts in the middle of faces. But one thing you cannot do in Maya 2011 is start on an edge and end on that same edge without crossing into other faces. But you can get around this by completing it to another edge and then coming back and finishing off the shape. Okay, so let's do this one more time. This time you'll notice I'm not clicking on every edge. I'm actually able to skip over edges. I'm just clicking every other one. It's another thing you can do with this tool. You don't have to click on every edge. And so that is the basics of using the split polygon tool, which is a great tool for adding custom cuts to your geometry. But let's move on to the next tool, which is the Insert Edge Loops tool. And as you can see, to use this tool, you select an edge, and what it does is it adds a loop of edges to the edge that you've selected. This tool has a very interactive feel to it. You can kind of drag where you want the tessellation to happen, and it works really good on quad-based geometry as long as there's no triangles. And the next tool, which is very similar to the Insert Edge Loop tool, is the Offset Edge Loop tool. And here we select an edge, and what it does is you can interactively add two edges to either side of the edge that has been selected. This tool works well for creating things like bricks and stairs. For example, I can select this inner ring of edges and scale it in, giving us a brick-like effect. Let's undo that. And for good measure, let's do it one more time. So let's go up to the Edit Mesh tab, select Offset Edge Loop tool, and let's do a vertical one over here to the right. So the last couple of tools have been very good for adding kind of loops of edges into our geometry. But if you want to subdivide the geometry as a whole, the Add Division tool is the way to go. And looking at the options here, you can see we can adjust the division levels. We can also add divisions exponentially or in a linear fashion. Let's apply this, add the divisions. And what we've done now is just added a bunch of subdivisions to this piece. We can also go to the channel box after the fact and, kind of up the amount of divisions and just start tweaking with the numbers to get the right level of tessellation that we want. And for those of you who are using ZBrush a lot, this is a great way to prepare a piece for ZBrush. ZBrush wants things to be in more smaller quads. Alright, so moving on, let's undo that. Delete the construction history of this piece, and let's just get this out of the scene for now. And what I want to do is go to the Polygon tab and create a new cube. You can also see that I have now detached the Edit Mesh tab to a menu on the left-hand side, so I can easily get at the bevel feature, which takes any edge and offsets it to create a nice beveled look. And you can see right now I'm going to play with the offset a little bit to expand and contract the size of the bevel. And notice if you take it to 1, you completely destroy your piece in a way. And so I'm going to take my offset and put it back at 0.05, which I think looks pretty good. I'm going to show you how to fill in a hole. But first, we need to delete this face in order to fill it back in. Go up to the Mesh tab, and I'm tearing that tab off so that I can get at the Fill Hole button here. And if you select the edge next to the hole you want to fill, click Fill Hole, it will fill that back in. So that's a good way to kind of fill in faces that might have accidentally been deleted or faces that don't exist currently. But if you want to create a polygon from scratch, the Create Polygon tool is the tool to use. So clicking clockwise, you can just draw some points out, and it'll fill it in and make a face out of it. I'm going to really quickly center the pivot point on this and extrude it up. And now I have a nice little piece of geometry here. But if I toggle the back face, you can see that all the faces have been reversed. And this happened because using the Create Polygon tool, I clicked clockwise. If I was to have clicked counterclockwise, like so, then when I do my extrusion, all the normals will be facing outward, which is what we want, and we won't have to reverse any of the faces. So using the Create Polygon tool, it's important to, when you're kind of drawing out your polygon, to move in a counterclockwise fashion. Alright, so the next thing I want to talk about is merging vertices. So I've selected 2 vertices, and under the Edit Mesh tab, I click the Merge button. And lo and behold, it merged them all into one vert. But sometimes if you click it, you'll notice that it doesn't because your threshold is too low. So go into the Options tab. I'm adjusting the threshold, making it larger. Now you'll notice that as I up the threshold here, I can now merge vertices that are pretty far apart. So really it's up to you when you're merging verts together to make sure that your threshold is correct. If it's too low, nothing will actually merge together. If it's too high, you may merge together more verts than you're intending. So let's go ahead and undo this. And the last feature I want to go over in this chapter is triangulation. So if we hit the triangulate button under the mesh tab, you'll notice that it triangulated all the quads, which depending on the game engine you're working on might be something that you have to do, or it might be something to avoid at all costs. But that's going to depend on the game engine you're working with. So what I'm going to do now is speed up this clip a little bit and just kind of demo all the different modeling tools and make a very basic shape. So I used the Create Polygon tool to create a little base here, and I used the Insert Edge Loops tool to add these divisions. Now I'm going to harden them under the Normals Harden Edge, and let's extrude these faces down here. Add a little bevel to that edge, and we'll take this face using Extrude to push in the face a little bit to add another extrusion and another bevel on the top. Mostly I'm using, you can see, extrusion tools, beveling tools, and the Insert Edge Loops tools. And so you'll notice that with just a few tools I'm able to do quite a lot. And you can see with this shape I just started with a sphere, snapped it to the face, deleted the faces that I didn't need, and then just used the Extrude tool to kind of push out a little base. Right now I'm using the Split Polygon tool to trim out an area so that I can attach this kind of sphere shape to my object. Now I'll combine them into one object and then go along and delete these faces along the bottom that I don't see. And to duplicate what we did with the circle and this front face, I'm going to extract that face and now rotate it and put it back on and combine the object so that I don't have to do that work 4 separate times. And there you go. We've created a nice little element just with the tools that we learned in this chapter. I'm going to go ahead and soften the edge and then harden it back just to make sure that everything's welded together. And there you have it.